The question today is, will Zoro surpass Gold D. Roger? Now, I know the thought of Zoro being anywhere near Roger in terms of power at the end of the series is an absurd and an insane assumption to the vast majority of you One Piece watchers. Hey, it's crazy to me, but I now have seen a different outlook on how powerful Oda can really make Zoro at the end of the series, even so powerful to surpass the likes of the Pirate King himself. I know, sounds crazy, I sound delusional, but let's talk about it. So I'll divide this into 3 sections. First, we'll start off with how powerful and how strong Zoro is now. Then we'll discuss how strong Zoro is in comparison to a lot of the characters such as admirals, commanders, Yonko, etc. And lastly, we will talk about if it makes sense for Zoro to be stronger than the Pirate King himself. So without further ado, let's get into it. So thankfully, we got to see the full capabilities of Roronoa Zoro at Wano. It all started with the battle on the rooftop where the supernovas fought Kaido, and this wasn't even when he was at his strongest in that arc. In this battle, we've seen him take on Kaido. In multiple occasions, he's able to land good hits on Kaido. There's moments where he's able to cut Kaido, and there's this one specific scene where he charges up an attack so strong that actually makes Kaido want to dodge the attack and makes Big Mom yell out in fear, "Kaido, you gotta dodge," making Yonkos respect the power of Zoro. And another insane thing he did on that rooftop was block one of the strongest, or probably the strongest attack we've possibly seen in One Piece, the combined attack with Big Mom and Kaido, and Zoro was able to block that in order to save all his friends and his captain from a pending doom. Granted, he didn't block it forever, he did take massive repercussions, but being able to stop that for even a moment is an insane feat. Speaking about that, while Zoro taking the damage of that crazy attack, he was able to get up and have one last altercation with Kaido, and where he uses his most powerful and most famous attack, Ashura. And with this attack, he's able to actually outclass Kaido for a brief moment in their altercation and leave a scar on him. The only person we know to ever leave a scar on Kaido was Kozuki Oden. Granted, Zoro's scar is not as noteworthy as Oden's, but it is something to be really impressed about. If Zoro was fully healthy, we might be seeing a way bigger scar or a lot more damage. That alone was enough for especially you Zoro fans to have this man above characters like Katakuri, Marco, and I'm not gonna say I necessarily disagreed with you, but when Zoro fought King later on in Wano, that completely solidified everything. In this battle, Zoro was getting his ass kicked. King had the upper hand majority of the time, or should I say like 100% of the time, and he was completely overpowering Zoro. Zoro literally stood no chance. He was just being King's ragdoll for the whole fight until he got his power up. Zoro was struggling to use his sword Enma for majority of that fight until he finally got a grasp of it, and then that led to him getting an insane power up, or one of the best power ups in the entire series, Advanced Conqueror's Haki. Prior to this, Zoro was not able to damage King at all with his flames on. Now when he got the power up, King with his flames on, who we know is extremely durable, was even scared of getting hit by Zoro's attack, hence why he now had to dodge pretty much everything Zoro was throwing at him. I want you guys to remember Kaido did mention that only a handful of the strongest people can use his ability, making Zoro in that equation, and we all know the handful of the people in the series who can use his ability are the legends and the strongest characters to ever exist, including Gold D. Roger. Zoro showcased how strong he was in comparison to King right after he got that ability. He went from getting stomped and low diff to absolutely destroying King in that battle. Now let's talk about how that Zoro might stack up against other characters in the series. Like I just mentioned, having the ability of Advanced Conqueror's Haki already gives him the edge over a lot of these first commanders. So to give you guys some example, I definitely do think this Zoro is way stronger than the likes of Katakuri. Also King, obviously, because after he got that ability, he inevitably stomped him, and we visually seen that, so that is a no-brainer. When it comes to Marco, I do believe he is way more powerful than Marco. Marco is a haki-less character who hasn't shown any haki feats. He mainly shown his tough endurance and durability. That wouldn't be enough to say he's stronger than a character like Zoro, and not to mention Zoro also has crazy endurance as well, so that whole package that Marco's working with isn't enough to be stronger than a character like Zoro. Now that leads us to characters like Sabo and Ben Beckman. Sabo has a ton of lore around him. He's the Flame Emperor. Narratively, I don't know if I'm ready to say Zoro is stronger than Sabo. He very well could be, because he does have defeats in his favor, but I feel like the whole lore and the sigma around Sabo and what he's doing in the verse right now, you gotta be pretty powerful to pull off what he's doing. They call him the Flame Emperor Sora for a reason. I don't know if I would say Zoro is stronger than Sabo, but they're definitely on the same level. When it comes to Ben Beckman, I think he is now reaching his level. It all depends on how strong you guys think Ben Beckman is, but since he's the vice captain, the right-hand man of Shanks, said to be as feared as Shanks in the East Blue, I think you gotta be pretty powerful to have that type of comparison. So I don't think he's stronger than those guys necessarily, but he's definitely on the same level. But that's not a bad thing, because knowing those characters, we believe them to be almost as strong or even stronger than an admiral, and that's where I expect Zoro to be. Zoro's in a level of power where he can now be classified almost as strong as an admiral, but to some of you guys, I know he's stronger than an admiral. I'm not willing to say that yet, but with what he's shown, the case could be that Zoro can now fight almost on an equal playing field with any of the admirals, or more specifically, in my opinion, Green Bull and Fujitora. And I bring this up to say, if Zoro's already at this level, we're not necessarily extremely close to the end of the series. If Zoro gets any stronger, where would that necessarily take him in terms of how strong he is in comparison to the people like Goldie Roger, like Shanks? If he's now just touching the admiral level, and we know he's bound to get stronger and stronger, where will that take him? Now let's talk about how strong Zoro might be at the end of the series, and more specifically in comparison to a character like Goldie Roger. Now it's hard to tell because we don't necessarily know the full capabilities of Goldie Roger. We know he's the Pirate King, we know he's on par with the world's strongest man, we know that information about him, but when it comes to Zoro, we're gonna know his full capabilities and all the abilities he can use and how strong he is, because we're gonna see him fight. But I think what's necessarily gonna be able to put Zoro over a character like Goldie Roger might be simply due to narrative. Zoro made a promise to Kurina, and his goal was to someday become the greatest swordsman ever / the strongest swordsman ever, and we already knew this. And this isn't a video to talk about who really is a swordsman and who isn't, but I don't think Goldie Roger is necessarily gonna escape this dream of Zoro, and I think this could also apply to him as well. So from what we've seen, Goldie Roger is a swordsman. I think we could all agree on that. Whenever we've seen this man fight, he was using his sword. When he fought with Whitebeard, when he fought against Odin, whenever he fights, his sword does get used, hence it would make sense for him to be a swordsman. And to add on to the fact that he named his beloved sword after his beloved son Ace. He loved his sword so much that he named it after his son. Also, his right hand man Rayleigh is considered a swordsman as well. Every time you've seen Rayleigh fight, he's using a sword, whether that is pre-time skip, whether that is in a flashback when he was with the Roger Pirates, whether that's in the latest chapter where Rayleigh was pulling up to Blackbeard and he was about to unsheath his sword in order to fight Blackbeard, whether that's fighting Kizaru, you guys know exactly what I mean. These characters are very sword dominant from what we can tell, especially Rayleigh. There's also a magazine cover that I wanted to show you guys that Oda didn't necessarily make, but he did co-sign this because he was asked, can we do a manga cover page for the One Piece characters who are swordsmen? He did approve on who was on this picture. We obviously see Zoro at the front, we see Shanks, we see Mihawk, we see Beasta, we see all these guys, and at the corner you do see Goldie Roger. Now what I just want to point to perspective is that by Zoro surpassing Mihawk could imply that he surpasses everybody who's a swordsman as well. I know characters like Mihawk and Zoro are more in tune with their sword. They're probably going to be the only characters in the series with a black blade. Doesn't excuse other characters from falling under that title. There's no difference between a fighter like Zoro and, from what we've seen, a fighter like Roger, unless you're only basing this title off the flick of the wrist and how well you can move around with the sword and what techniques you can produce. Then that would kind of make sense, but it wouldn't make sense to look at it like that. Swordsmanship isn't just how well you can flick your wrist, because we see that with Zoro himself. Zoro is one of the most physically strong characters in the series, and he applies that physicality to his swordsmanship. Zoro is also one of the most hockey dominant characters in the series, having advanced Ardaman hockey and having one of the best abilities to ever be in the series, advanced Conqueror's hockey, to add on to his swordsmanship. And from what we know, that's exactly what you need to fight as a swordsman, and that's exactly what Goldie Roger displays to us when he fights. Zoro just does it with with 3 swords. So when Zoro, like he says, becomes the greatest swordsman ever, in theory he should be greater than Roger himself. Think of it like this, he already possesses the ability of what Roger possesses, and we know he's just gonna get stronger from them, and then he still has 3 black blades he needs to make by the end of the series. So not only is he gonna be a swordsman that possesses the same ability as Roger, but he's gonna have 3 black blades on top of that. And the last thing I want to mention is that Zoro, in one of the more recent chapters when he got a flashback, he tells Kuina, I'll have to keep my promise for the both of us. I'm going to become such a great sword master that my name will be known even in the heavens. So all these swordsmen like Roger, etc. that are in heaven, supposedly, they're gonna know of this great legend, the man who's the strongest character with the sword. Let me ask you guys this, right? Wouldn't it be awkward for the greatest swordsman to ever wield a sword can be defeated by someone who's also fighting predominantly with the sword? I know the assumption is the other person can have better hockey, making them stronger than the other guy who's using a sword. Roger could just be a stronger hockey person than Zoro. He could be physically stronger than Zoro. But those are the things that make up swordsmanship, right? Like we just explained to Zoro, Zoro knows you have to be physically strong. You have to have the best hockey to be the strongest swordsman. All that stuff ties into it. So my question is to you, does Zoro become the greatest swordsman in the entirety of One Piece? Or does it become the greatest swordsman, but other swordsmen can still defeat him? Let me know.